Shell in Nigeria. One of the largest unnatural disasters in Nigerian history was caused by Shell. Today we're going to talk about Nigerian oil, specifically Shell's involvement during the 1990s and the effects it still has today.
Nigeria is currently the highest grossing and largest quantity oil producer in the African continent and the fourth largest exporter in the world. However, with all of the instability, supply disruptions, civil unrest, pollution, and corruption caused by the happenings of Shell, Nigeria still tends to lose money in their operations. Nigeria became a member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, in 1971. This was considered relatively early, considering the discovery of the amount of oil that could be produced from the fertile lands of Nigeria and the Niger River Delta, which was not until the late 1950s. One of the main issues that Nigeria faces in its oil production is supply disruption, from sources such as protesters, deliberate destruction of pipelines, and many others. This disruption can reduce oil production and cost Nigeria as many as 500,000 barrels a day, in addition to significant physical damages caused. The oil companies drilling in Nigeria gain so much money that many people plot to destroy them purely out of envy. Many groups force companies to declare force majeure on oil shipments. Also, many oil thefts lead to terrible results such as pipeline damage, causing pollution, loss of production, and forced shutdown of production plants. Many other issues of oil companies are that due to the lack of infrastructure and government regulations, they have free range on their production techniques in the interest of cutting prices, maximizing production, and minimizing expenses. As a result of this freedom, companies do not maintain or regularly check up on the quality and stability of their pipes, which often leads to oil spills. In addition, flaring and other methods of pollution are common practice.
Now I'm going to talk about Shell's involvement in Nigeria. The land Shell was drilling on was inhabited by the native Ogoni people. These people rely on agriculture for their way of life, so the lack of responsibility by Shell in terms of environmental preservation had a devastating impact on them. Shell had spills and regularly used flaring methods which burn off unusable natural gas and release emissions into the atmosphere. These environmental problems were only the start of the issue between the Ogoni people and Shell. An Ogoni organization called the Movement for the Survival of Ogoni People, or MOSOP, rose up against all these happenings and fought back against the harmful influence of Shell. This led to the displacement, death, and devastation of a massive number of Ogoni people when Shell, aided by the Nigerian government, decided to ruthlessly suppress their fight without concern for life or property. The leader of MOSOP was Ken Saro-Wiwa, and Nigeria ended up charging him with capital crimes and hanging him. One major environmental issue caused by Shell in Nigeria was flaring. Flaring caused acid rain which contaminated drinking water and killed crops. The intense heat emitted from the flaring also destroyed homes and crops by burning them. Flaring accounted for 76% of Shell's excess natural gas disposal. Nigeria had no laws to protect the Ogoni people, but it did have laws protecting Shell's rights to produce the oil on that land. This led to the Ogoni people rising up against Nigerian government and Shell, and after much turmoil, Nigeria formed the River State Internal Security Force to combat these disruptions. This force murdered over 2,000 unarmed civilians, destroyed 37 villages, and displaced 30,000 Ogoni people. Shell ended up having to cease operations due to the instability of affairs in Nigeria. Shell had a long road ahead repairing the damages left by their ethics violations and crimes that were condemned by the United Nations. Corporate social responsibility refers to a company's attempts or initiatives to take responsibility for the effects on social and environmental well-being that accompany standard operations. Therefore, Shell partnered with Sustainability, a consultant group, to handle this renovation. Their first CSR movement was towards transparency, meaning Shell would now report their health, safety, and environmental statuses for the public eye. Their second movement was for stakeholders, in which Shell advertised their self-imposed social and environmental regulations in order to avoid criticism. Shell's CSR campaign saved their business and helped them begin the road to regaining the world's trust.
Recently, in the fight between the Nigerian people and the Shell Oil Company, Amir Godwin, leader of Nigeria's Ogale people, traveled all the way from Africa to London to sue Royal Dutch Shell. He brought with him bottles of water from streams in the surrounding villages to prove to the court just how contaminated Shell has left their drinking water. The Nigerian water is contaminated with oil and many other harmful toxins such as benzene. They're known to cause cancer. His people have no choice but to drink this water daily. Lawyers for more than 40,000 Nigerians are defending action from Shell to clean up oil spills. Britain's High Court began hearing lawsuits recently filed by the Ogale and BA people, stating that years of oil spills have contaminated the water supply and ruined the lives of thousands of fishermen and farmers in the Niger River Delta, where Shell has been operating since the 1950s. They traveled to London to fight because that is Shell's home base, and because the Nigerian courts cannot be trusted due to their history of corruption and affiliations with the Shell Corporation. The Shell Company is trying to argue that the hearing should take place in Nigerian courts, revealing its involvement in the Nigerian subsidiary, SPDC, which teams up with the government and Nigerian plaintiffs.
We have talked about Nigeria's infrastructure, how dependent they are on oil and gas, and how much trouble this dependence has caused them in recent decades. Next, we talked about the Ogoni battle against Shell's unethical practices and detrimental effects on their livelihoods, the oppression from the Nigerian government to suppress the Ogoni Revolution, and the public relations turnaround that Shell launched following their condemnation by the United Nations. Finally, we talked about the settlements that are still being heard decades after Shell's Nigerian production and the extent to which Shell feels responsible for repairing the damages they caused.